Welcome to Exploration Dreamland, a quiet read aloud of the writings of explorers of the real world and the worlds of imagination. Drop anchor, relax into your comfortable bunk, and drift off to Dreamland with us as we read a lightly edited version of The Gradual Acceptance of the Copernican Theory of the Universe by Dorothy Stimson, Ph.D., published in 1917. It traces the web of ideas of famous thinkers and mathematicians about the structure of our galaxy through time. The book will be read in order, so if you would like to begin at the beginning, please start with Season 5, Episode 96. This work was written quite some time ago, and therefore does not necessarily reflect current-day outlooks and language choices. The scientific texts may use outdated terminology or be inaccurate in light of more recent discoveries. This podcast was created primarily to help you relax and to entertain you. The texts are chosen for their ability to charm and interest you, rather than for educational purposes. Apologies in advance for any mispronunciation. I am unfamiliar with most of the languages used in this book, but have done my best with online pronunciation guides. If you would like to stay in touch between episodes, you can follow us on Blue Sky, Instagram, or Facebook at Exploration Dreamland. If you have a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, even if you don't listen there, it helps more than you know. You can also hear our episodes on YouTube. If you are listening there, please like our episodes and leave a comment for us. We love hearing from you. Now, take a deep breath in, and as you exhale, relax any tension in your muscles. Close your eyes, snuggle into your sleeping space, and listen to tonight's tale. Chapter 3: The Later Development and Scientific Defense of the Copernican System. Copernicus accomplished much, but even his genius could not far outrun the times in which he lived. When one realizes that not only all the astronomers before him, but he and his immediate successor, Tycho Brahe, made all their observations and calculations unaided by even the simplest telescope, by logarithms or by pendulum clocks for accurate measurement of time, one marvels not at their errors, but at the greatness of their genius in rising above such difficulties. This lack of material aids makes the work of Tycho Brahe, accounted one of the greatest observers that has ever lived, as notable in its way perhaps as that of Copernicus. Footnote: the two standard lives of Tycho Brahe are the Vita Tychonis Brahe by Gassendi, 1655, till recently the sole source of information, and Dreyer's Tycho Brahe, 1890, based not only on Gassendi, but on the documentary evidence disclosed by the researches of the 19th century. For Tycho's works, I have used the Opera Omnia, published at Frankfurt in 1648. The Danish Royal Scientific Society has issued a reprint in 1901 of the rare 1573 edition of the De Nova Stella. End footnote. His life was a somewhat romantic one. Born of a noble family on December 14, 1546, at Knudstrup in Denmark, Tyge Brahe, the second of 10 children, was early practically adopted by his father's brother. His family wished him to become a statesman and sent him in 1559 to the university at Copenhagen to prepare for that career. A partial eclipse of the sun on August 21, 1560, as foretold by the astronomers, thrilled the lad and determined him to study a science that could foretell the future and so affect men's lives. When he was sent to Leipzig with a tutor in 1562 to study law, he devoted his time and money to the study of mathematics and astronomy. 2 years later, when 18 years of age, he resolved to perform anew the task of Hipparchus and Ptolemy and make a catalogue of the stars more accurate than theirs. His family hotly opposed these plans, and for 6 years he wandered through the German states, now at Wittenberg, now at Rostock, where he fought the duel in which he lost part of his nose and had to have it replaced by one of gold or silver, or at Augsburg, everywhere working on his chosen subjects. But upon his return to Denmark in 1570, he spent 2 years on chemistry and medicine, till the startling appearance of the new star in the constellation of Cassiopeia, in November 1572, recalled him to what became his life work. Through the interest and favor of King Frederick II, he was given the island of Hveen near Elsinore, with money to build an observatory and the pledge of an annual income from the state treasury for his support. There, at Uraniborg, from 1576 to 1597, he and his pupils made the great catalogue of the stars and studied comets and the moon. When he was forced to leave Hveen by the hostility and the economical tendencies of the young king, after 2 years of wandering, he accepted the invitation of the Emperor Rudolphus and established himself at Prague in Bohemia. Among his assistants at Prague was young Johann Kepler, who, till Tycho's death on October 24, 1601, was his chief helper for 20 months, and who afterwards completed his observations, publishing the results in the Rudolphine Tables of 1627. This, quote, phoenix among astronomers, as Kepler calls him, was the father of modern practical astronomy. He also propounded a third system of the universe, a compromise between the Ptolemaic and the Copernican. In this, the Tychonic system, the Earth is motionless and is the center of the orbits of the Sun, the Moon, and the sphere of the fixed stars, while the Sun is the center of the orbits of the 5 planets. Footnote: as stated in his Book on the Comet of 1577, published in 1588, end footnote. Mercury and Venus move in orbits with radii shorter than the Sun's radius, and the other 3 planets include the Earth within their circuits. This system was in harmony with the Bible, and accounted as satisfactorily by geometry as either of the other 2 systems for the observed phenomena. To Tycho Brahe, the Ptolemaic system was too complex, and the Copernican absurd, the latter because to account for the absence of stellar parallax it left vacant and purposeless a vast space between Saturn and the sphere of the fixed stars. and because Tycho's observations did not show any trace of the stellar parallax that must exist if the Earth moves. Footnote: the Tychonic system has supporters to this day. See Part 2, Chapter 5. End footnote. Though Tycho thus rejected the Copernican theory, his own proved to be the stepping stone toward the one he rejected, for by it, and by his study of comets, he completely destroyed the ideas of solid crystalline spheres to the discredit of the scholastics, and his promulgation of a third theory of the universe helped to diminish men's confidence in authority and to stimulate independent thinking. Copernicus worked out his system by mathematics with but slight aid from his own observations. It was a theory not yet proven true. Tycho Brahe, though denying its validity, contributed in his mass of painstaking, accurate observations the raw material of facts to be worked up by Kepler into the great laws of the planets, attesting the fundamental truth of the Copernican hypothesis. Johann Kepler earned for himself the proud title of, quote, lawmaker for the universe, in defiance of his handicaps of ill health, family troubles, and straitened finances. Born in Vey, Württemberg, of noble but indigent parents, he was a sickly child, unable for years to attend school regularly. He finally left the monastery school in Moulefontaine in 1586 and entered the university at Tübingen to stay for 4.5 years. There he studied philosophy, mathematics, and theology. He was a Lutheran, receiving the degree of Master of Arts in 1591. While at the university, he studied under Maestlin, professor of mathematics and astronomy, and a believer in the Copernican theory. Because of Maestlin's teaching, Kepler developed into a confirmed and enthusiastic adherent to the new doctrine. In 1594, he reluctantly abandoned his favorite study, philosophy, and accepted a professorship in mathematics at Graz in Styria. 2 years later, he published his first work, Prodromus Dissertationum Continens Mysterium Cosmographicum, etc., 1596, in which he sought to prove that the Creator, in arranging the universe, had thought of the 5 regular bodies which can be inscribed in a sphere, according to which he had regulated the order, the number, and the proportions of the heavens and their movements. This book is important, not only because of its novelty, but because it gave the Copernican doctrine public explanation and defense. Kepler himself valued it enough to reprint it with his Harmonia Mundi 25 years later, and it won for him appreciative letters from various scientists, notably from Tycho Brahe and Galileo. As Kepler, a Lutheran, was having difficulties in Graz, a Catholic city, he finally accepted Tycho's urgent invitation to come to Prague. He came early in 1600, and after some adjustments had been made between the two, he and his family settled with Tycho that autumn to remain till the latter's death the following November. Kepler himself then held the office of imperial mathematician by appointment for many years thereafter. With the researches of Tycho's lifetime placed at his disposal, Kepler worked out 2 of his 3 great planetary laws from Tycho's observations of the planet Mars. Yet, as Bertrand remarks, it was well for Kepler that his material was not too accurate, or its variations, due to the then unmeasured force of attraction, might have hindered him from proving his laws, and luckily for him, the Earth's orbit is so nearly circular that in calculating the orbit of Mars to prove its elliptical form, he could base his work on the Earth's orbit as a circle without vitiating his results for Mars. Footnote: the two laws first appeared in 1609 in his Physica Celestis Tradita Commentarius de Motu Stellae Martis. The third he enunciated in his Harmonia Mundi, 1619. End footnote. That a planet's orbit is an ellipse and not the perfect circle was of course a triumph for the new science over the scholastics and Aristotelians, but they had yet to learn what held the planets in their courses. From Kepler's student days under Maestlin, when, as the subject of his disputation, he upheld the Copernican theory, to his death in 1630, he was a staunch supporter of the new teaching. Footnote: Cor et animam meam, Kepler's expression in regard to the Copernican theory. End footnote. In his Epitome Astronomiae Copernicanae of 1616, he answered objections to it at length. He took infinite pains to convert his friends to the new system. It was in vain that Tycho on his deathbed had urged Kepler to carry on their work, not on the Copernican, but on the Tychonic scheme. Kepler had reasoned out according to physics the laws by which the planets moved. In Italy at this same time, Galileo, with his optic tube, invented in 1609, was demonstrating that Venus had phases, even as Copernicus had declared, that Jupiter had satellites, and that the moon was scarred and roughened. Ocular proof that the old system, with its heavenly perfection in number, 7 planets, and in appearance, must be cast aside. Within a year after Galileo's death, Newton was born. His demonstration of the universal application of the law of gravitation in 1687 was perhaps the climax in the development of the Copernican system. Complete and final proof was adding in the succeeding years by Roemer's discovery of the velocity of light, by Bradley's study of its aberration, by Bessel's discovery of stellar parallax in 1838, and by Foucault's experimental demonstration of the Earth's axial motion with a pendulum in 1851. Part 2. The Reception of the Copernican Theory. Chapter 1. Opinions and Arguments in the 16th Century. During the lifetime of Copernicus, Roman Catholic churchmen had been interested in his work. Cardinal Schönberg wrote for full information. Wiedmanstadt reported on it to Pope Clement VII, and Copernicus had dedicated his book to Pope Paul III. But after his death, the church authorities apparently paid little heed to his theory until some 50 years later, when Giordano Bruno forced it upon their attention in his philosophical teachings. Osiander's preface had probably blinded their eyes to its implications. The Protestant leaders were not quite so urbane in their attitude. While Copernicus was still alive, Luther is reported to have referred to this, quote, new astrologer, who sought to prove that the earth and not the firmament swung around, saying, quote, the fool will overturn the whole science of astronomy. But as the Holy Scriptures state, Joshua bade the sun stand still and not the earth." End quote. Melanchthon was more interested in this new idea, perhaps because of the influence of Rheticus, his colleague in the University of Wittenberg, and Copernicus's great friend and supporter. But he too preferred not to dissent from the accepted opinion of the ages. Informally, in a letter to a friend, he implies the absurdity of the new teaching, and in his Initia Doctrinae Physicae, he goes to some pains to disprove the new assumption, not merely by mathematics, but by the Bible, though with a kind of apology to other physicists for quoting the divine witness. He refers to the phrase in Psalm 19, likening the sun in its course, quote, "to a strong man about to run a race," proving that the sun moves. Another psalm states that the earth was founded not to be moved for eternity, and a similar phrase occurs in the first chapter of Ecclesiastes. Then there was the miracle when Joshua bade the sun stand still. While this is a sufficient witness to the truths, there are other proofs. First, in the turning of a circumference, the center remains motionless. Next, changes in the length of the day and of the seasons would ensue were the position of the earth in the universe not central, and it would not be equidistant from the two poles. He has previously disposed of infinity by stating that the heavens revolve around the pole, which could not happen if a line drawn from the center of the universe were infinitely projected. Furthermore, the earth must be at the center for its shadow to fall upon the moon in an eclipse. He refers next to the Aristotelian statement that to a simple body belongs one motion. The earth is a simple body, therefore it can have but one motion. What is true of the parts applies to the whole. All the parts of the earth are borne toward the earth and there rest. Therefore the whole earth is at rest. Quiet is essential to growth. Lastly, if the earth moved as fast as it must, if it moves at all, everything would fly to pieces. Melanchthon thus sums up the usual arguments from the Scriptures, from Aristotle, Ptolemy, and the then current physics, in opposition to this theory. Not only did he publish his own textbook on physics, but he republished Sacrobosso's famous Introduction to Astronomy, writing for it a preface urging diligent study of this little text, endorsed by so many generations of scholars. Calvin, the great teacher of the Protestant revolt, apparently was little touched by this new intellectual current. Footnote: from Farrar, The History of Interpretation, Preface, quote, "Who, asks Calvin, will venture to place the authority of Copernicus above that of the Holy Spirit?" End quote. End footnote. He did write a semi-popular tract against the so-called judicial astrology, then widely accepted, which he, like Luther, condemns as a foolish superstition, though he values, quote, "la vraie science d'astrologie," from which men understand not merely the order and place of the stars and planets, but the causes of things. In his commentaries, he accepts the miracle of the sun's standing still at Joshua's command as proof of the faith Christ commended, so strong that it will remove mountains, and he makes reference only to the time-honored Ptolemaic theory in his discussion of Psalm 19. For the absolute authority of the Pope, the Protestant leaders substituted the absolute authority of the Bible. It is not strange, then, that they ignored or derided a theory as yet unsupported by proof and so difficult to harmonize with a literally accepted Bible. How widespread among the people generally did this theory become in the years immediately following the publication of the De Revolutionibus? Monsieur Flammarion, in his Vie de Copernic in 1872, refers to the famous clock in the Strasbourg Cathedral as having been constructed by the University of Strasbourg in protest against the action taken by the Holy Office against Galileo. Though the clock was constructed in 1571, and Galileo was not condemned until 1633. This astronomical clock, constructed only 30 years after the death of Copernicus, he claims represented the Copernican system of the universe with the planets revolving around the sun, and explained clearly in the sight of the people what was the thought of the makers. Lest no one should miscomprehend, he adds, the portrait of Copernicus was placed there with this inscription: Nicolae Copernici vera effigiis, ex ipsius autographo depicta. This would be important evidence of the spread of the theory, were it true. But Monsieur Flammarion must have failed to see a brief description of the Strasbourg clock written in 1856 by Charles Schwilge, son of the man who renovated its mechanism in 1838 to 1842. He describes the clock as it was before his father made it over, and as it is today. Originally constructed in 1352, it was replaced in 1571 by an astrolabe based on the Ptolemaic system. 6 hands with the zodiacal signs of the planets gave their daily movements and, together with a 7th representing the sun, revolved around a map of the world. When Monsieur Schwilge repaired the clock in 1838, he changed it to harmonize with the Copernican system. But within 18 years after the publication of the De Revolutionibus, proof of its influence is to be found in such widely separated places as London and the great Spanish University of Salamanca. In 1551, Robert Ricord, court physician to Edward and to Mary, and teacher of mathematics, published in London his Castle of Knowledge, an introduction to astronomy, and the first book printed in England describing the Copernican system. He evidently did not consider the times quite ripe for a full avowal of his own allegiance to the new doctrine, but the remarks of the master and the scholar are worth repeating. Quote, Master, howbeit Copernicus, a man of great learning, of much experience, and of wonderful diligence in observation, hath renewed the opinion of Aristarchus Samius, affirming that the earth not only moveth circularly about his own centre, but also may be, yea, and is, continually out of the precise centre of the world, 830,000 miles. But because the understanding of that controversy depends of profounder knowledge than in this introduction may be uttered conveniently, I will let it pass till some other time. Scholar. Nay, sit. In good faith, I desire not to hear such vain fantasies, so far against the common reason, and repugnant to the content of all the learned multitude of writers, and therefore let it pass for ever and a day longer. Master. You are too young to be a good judge in so great a matter. It passeth far your learning, and theirs also that are much better learned than you. to improve his supposition by good arguments, and therefore you were best condemn nothing that you do not well understand. But another time, as I said, I will so declare his supposition, that you shall not only wonder to hear it, but also peradventure be as earnest then to credit it, as you are now to condemn it. In the mean season, let us proceed forward in our former order." Footnote quoted from the edition of 1596 in the library of Mr. George A. Plimpton. See also records Whetstone of Wit of 1557, as cited by Barry. End footnote. This little book, reprinted in 1556 and in 1596, and one of the most popular of the mathematical writings in England during that century, must have interested the English in the new doctrine even before Bruno's emphatic presentation of it to them in the 80s. Yet the English did not welcome it cordially. One of the most popular books of this period was Sylvester's translation, in 1591, of Du Bartas's The Divine Weeks, which appeared in France in 1578, a book loved especially by Milton. Du Bartas writes, quote, "Those clerks that think how absurd a jest, that neither heavens nor stars do turn at all, nor dance around this great round earthly ball, but the earth itself, this massy globe of ours, turns round about once every twice 12 hours. And we resemble land-bred novices new brought aboard to venture on the seas, who at first launching from the shore suppose the ship stands still, and that the firm earth goes." End quote. Quite otherwise was the situation in the 16th century at the University of Salamanca. A new set of regulations for the university, drawn up at the king's order by Bishop Covarrubias, was published in 1561. It contained the provision in the curriculum that, quote, "Mathematics and astrology are to be given in 3 years. The first, astrology; the second, Euclid, Ptolemy, or Copernicus, ad vota audientium." End quote. Which also indicates, as Vicente de la Fuente points out, that at this university, quote, "the choice of the subject matter to be taught lay not with the teachers, but with the students, a rare situation." End quote. One wonders what happened there when the professors and students received word from the Cardinal Nuncio at Madrid in 1633 that the congregations of the Index had decreed the Copernican doctrine was thereafter in no way to be held, taught, or defended. One of the graduates of this university, Father Zuniga, better known as Didacus Austunica, wrote a commentary on Job that was licensed to be printed in 1579, but was not published until 1584 at Toledo. Another edition appeared at Rome 7 years later. It evidently was widely read, for it was condemned donec corrigatur by the Index in 1616, and the mathematical literature of the next half-century contains many allusions to his remarks on Job. Quote, "Who shaketh the earth out of her place, and the pillars thereof tremble." End quote. After commenting here upon the greater clarity and simplicity of the Copernican theory, Didacus Austunica then states that the theory is not contradicted by Solomon in Ecclesiastes, as that, quote, "text signifieth no more but this, that although the succession of ages and generations of men on earth be various, Yet the earth itself is still one and the same, and continueth without any sensible variation, ellipses inserted, and it hath no coherence with its context, as philosophers show, if it be expounded to speak of the earth's immobility. The motion that belongs to the earth by way of speech is assigned to the sun even by Copernicus himself and those who are his followers, ellipses inserted. To conclude, no place can be produced out of Holy Scriptures which so clearly speaks the earth's immobility as this doth its mobility. Therefore, this text of which we have spoken is easily reconciled to this opinion. And to set forth the wonderful power and wisdom of God who can endue the frame of the whole earth, it being of monstrous weight by nature, with motion, this our divine penman added, and the pillars thereof tremble, as if he would teach us from the doctrine laid down that it is moved from its foundations. End quote. Footnote: quoted in Salisbury from 1661 as a work inaccessible to most readers at that time because of its extreme rarity. It remained on the index until the edition of 1835. End footnote. French thinkers, like the English, did not encourage the new doctrine at this time. Montaigne was characteristically indifferent. Quote, "What shall we reap by it, but only that we need not care which of the two it be? And who knoweth whether 100 years hence a third option will arise, which happily shall overthrow these two precedent?" End quote. The famous political theorist Jean Bodin was as thoroughly opposed to it as Du Bartas had been. In the last year of his life, Bodin wrote his Universae Naturae Theatrum, in which he discussed the origin and composition of the universe and of the animal, vegetable, mineral, and spiritual kingdoms. Footnote: this book, published at Frankfurt in 1597, was translated into French by Monsieur Fouguereau and printed in Lyon that same year. It has become extremely rare since its, quote, atheistic atmosphere caused the Roman Church to place it upon the index by decree of 1628, where it has remained to this day. End footnote. These 5 books, or divisions, reveal his amazing ideas of geology, physics, and astronomy, while at the same time they show a mind thoroughly at home in Hebrew and Arabic literature as well as in the classics. His answer to the Copernican doctrine is worth quoting to illustrate the attitude of one of the keenest thinkers in a brilliant era. Quote, "Theorist, since the sun's heat is so intense that we read it has sometimes burned crops, houses, and cities in Scythia, would it not be more reasonable that the sun is still and the earth indeed revolves?" Mystic. Such was the old idea of Philolaus, Timaeus, Ecphantes, Seleucus, Aristarchus of Samos, Archimedes, and Eudoxus, which Copernicus has renewed in our time. But it can easily be refuted by its shallowness, although no one has done it thoroughly. Theorist. What arguments do they rely on who hold that the earth is revolved and that the sun, forsooth, is still? Mystic. Because the comprehension of the human mind cannot grasp the incredible speed of the heavenly spheres, and especially of the 10th sphere, which must be 10 times greater than that of the 8th, for in 24 hours it must traverse 469,562,845 miles, so that the earth seems like a dot in the universe. This is the chief argument. Besides this, we get rid entirely of epicycles in representing the motions of the planets, and what is taught concerning the motion of trepidation in the 8th sphere vanishes. Also, there is no need for the 9th and 10th spheres. There is one argument which they have omitted, but which seems to me more efficacious than any, viz., rest is nobler than movement, and that celestial and divine things have a stable nature, while elemental things have motion, disturbance, and unrest. Therefore, it seems more probable that the latter move rather than the former. But while serious absurdities result from the idea of Eudoxus, far more serious ones result from that of Copernicus. Theorist: what are these absurdities? Mystic: Eudoxus knew nothing of trepidation, so his idea seems to be less in error. But Copernicus, in order to uphold his own hypothesis, claims the earth has 3 motions, its diurnal and annual ones, and trepidation. If we add to these the pull of weight towards the center, we are attributing 4 natural motions to one and the same body. If this is granted, then the very foundations of physics must fall into ruins, for all are agreed upon this, that each natural body has but one motion of its own, and that all others are said to be either violent or voluntary. Therefore, since he claims the earth is agitated by 4 motions, one only can be its own, the others must be confessedly violent. Yet nothing violent in nature can endure continuously. Furthermore, the earth is not moved by water, much less by the motion of air or fire in the way we have stated the heavens are moved by the revolutions of the enveloping heavens. Copernicus further does not claim that all the heavens are immobile, but that some are moved, that is, the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. But why such diversity? No one in his senses, or imbued with the slightest knowledge of physics, will ever think that the earth, heavy and unwieldy from its own weight and mass, staggers up and down around its own center and that of the sun. For at the slightest jar of the earth, we would see cities and fortresses, towns and mountains thrown down. A certain courtier, Autolycus, when some astrologer in court was upholding Copernicus's idea before Duke Albert of Prussia, turning to the servant who was pouring the Falernian, said, "Take care that the flagon is not spilled." For if the earth were to be moved, neither an arrow shot straight up, nor a stone dropped from the top of a tower would fall perpendicularly, but either ahead or behind. With this argument Ptolemy refuted Eudoxus. But if we search into the secrets of the Hebrews and penetrate their sacred sanctuaries, all these arguments can easily be confirmed. For when the Lord of Wisdom said the sun swept in its swift course from the eastern shore to the west, he added this, terra vero stat aeternam. Lastly, all things on finding places suitable to their natures remain there, as Aristotle writes. Since therefore the earth has been allotted a place fitting its nature, it cannot be whirled around by other motion than its own. Theorist: I certainly agree to all the rest with you, but Aristotle's law, I think, involves a paralogism, for by this argument the heavens should be immobile, since they are in a place fitting their nature. Mystic, you argue subtly indeed, but in truth this argument does not seem necessary to me. For what Aristotle admitted, that while forsooth all the parts of the firmament changed their places, the firmament as a whole did not, is exceedingly absurd. For either the whole heaven is at rest, or the whole heaven is moved. The senses themselves disprove that it is at rest, therefore it is moved. For it does not follow that if a body is not moved away from its place, it is not moved in that place. Furthermore, since we have the most certain proof of the movement of trepidation, not only all the parts of the firmament, but also the 8 spheres must necessarily leave their places and move up and down, forward and back." End quote. This was the opinion of a profound thinker and experienced man of affairs living when Tycho Brahe and Bruno were still alive and Kepler and Galileo were beginning their astronomical investigations. But he was not alone in his views, as we shall see, for at the close of the 16th century, the Copernican doctrine had few avowed supporters. The Roman Church was still indifferent. The Protestants, clinging to the literal interpretation of the Bible, were openly antagonistic. The professors as a whole were too Aristotelian to accept or pay much attention to this novelty, except Kepler and his teacher Maestlin, though the latter refused to uphold it in his textbook. While astronomers and mathematicians who realized the insuperable objections to the Ptolemaic conception welcomed the Tychonic system as a via media, and the common folk, if they heard of it at all, must have ridiculed it because it was so plainly opposed to what they saw in the heavens every day. In the same way, their intellectual superiors exclaimed at the, quote, delirium of those supporting such a notion. One thinker, however, was to see far more in the doctrine than Copernicus himself had conceived, and by Giordano Bruno the Roman Church was to be aroused. Stay tuned for the next section of The Gradual Acceptance of the Copernican Theory of the Universe by Dorothy Stimson. Please follow, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast app. Keep in touch with us on Blue Sky, Instagram, Facebook, or YouTube, and recommend us to anyone you know who could use a quiet break or a little help falling asleep. Exploration Dreamland is produced, edited, and hosted by me, Sarah Van Zaley. A big thank you to Project Gutenberg and LibriVox for helping me find many interesting publications. Thanks also to Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com for providing the theme music for this show. The title of this piece is Kalimba Relaxation Music, if you would like to visit his website to hear it in its entirety. Sweet dreams.